from the shadows of childhood sexual abuse to radiant healing and unbreakable faith. Mary Demuth's raw, redemptive story will shatter your heart and rebuild it stronger, offering the blueprint every survivor needs to rise. Surviving the Unthinkable, Mary Demuth's journey from sexual abuse trauma to triumphant healing and how it empowers parents today. Welcome to Warfare Parenting, faith-driven strategies for struggling parents of teens and adult children. I'm your host, Laine Lawson Craft. You're in the right place if you're battling with prodigal children, facing family crises, or seeking spiritual guidance in parenting. Today, we'll equip you with powerful biblical strategies to reclaim your child's destiny and restore hope in your family. Let's step into this faith-filled journey of hope and healing together. On this episode of the Warfare Parenting Podcast, we dive into the depths of resilience and redemption with Mary Demuth, whose courageous story of surviving years of childhood sexual abuse has become a beacon of healing for so many. Mary's testimony isn't just about enduring forgiveness and unimaginable pain. It's a powerful narrative of how faith and forgiveness and God's grace can rewrite the scars of trauma into stories of triumph. Prepare your hearts as Mary opens up about her path to wholeness, offering hope to anyone wrestling with their own wounds or supporting loved ones through similar battles. Mary, thank you so much for coming to Warfare Parenting today.
It's great to be here. Thanks again for having me on.
Well, I just honor you, Mary. I watch you from afar. You've changed my life personally. I did your 90-day read through the Bible in 90 days. I've done that several times since. And it really has transformed my life. And I appreciate it because, I'm a busy lady and 365 days can seem long. And so I'm getting a little off, but I just want you to know on a personal level, I see the Lord in everything you do. And I know today it's going to be powerful. Sadly, Mary, we both agree we're seeing way too much of this, aren't we?
We are. There's so much trauma around and it makes me mad. I just, why? Of course, that comes into question as well. But I do know that God offers all human beings free will, which means some of them are going to choose to do things that harm others.
Terrible. Well, let's just start by sharing the early experiences that marked the beginning of your abuse and how it impacted your childhood.
My mom and dad were married because of pregnancy with me, and it lasted not very long. And there was some time where I was homeless, I think. I'm trying to confirm it, but no one will talk to me about it. And there was a period of time where I didn't know where my mom was, and I was living with my grandparents. And then when I was 5 years old, my mom married again, and that's when I started living with her, and things got really bad. So that whole year as a kindergartner, I was sexually abused by neighborhood teenage boys. And my babysitter must have known what was going on even before I told her. I did tell her, but she just didn't want to have to bother with me, so she let them do whatever they wanted. And it was traumatic. There was no grooming. It was just they took me out and they started inviting other people. And it was just a horrific year of my life. I did tell the babysitter, which is highly unusual for sexual abuse victims, especially a 5-year-old. She said to me that she would tell my mom. And the next day I was so peaceful. I was like, okay, I'm free. I don't have to deal with this anymore. The boys came to the babysitter's door again, knocked on the door, asked if I could go out and play, and she shoved me out into the street, and it happened again. And so as a 5-year-old, I also knew that if I told my parents, they would kill my parents. But I was just so desperate to be free of what they were doing that I just learned how to sleep. So for the little bit left of my kindergarten year, I just would run into the house, eat my lunch, and then lay in bed, in her bed, until 5 or 6 o'clock when my mom would pick me up. We subsequently moved, and I moved away from that situation enough to know that I was safe from those boys. But from that point on, I had this something like "come get me" on my forehead because predators just had a way of finding me. Plus, I was an only child. It was a very unsafe home. There was drugs in the home. There was abuse in the home. There was just all sorts of things going on in the home that made it very unsafe. So I was vulnerable because of that, but also vulnerable because I had been preyed on for so long. And my father was a predator. My biological father was a predator as well. And so I didn't realize he was because I was a kid. Looking back now on all of the terrible things that he did, when he died when I was 10 years old, I was sad because he was the only one that paid attention to me, but I didn't understand that the attention he was giving me was terrible. And so the only person that wanted to spend time with me, my biological father, was gone, and I lost everything. And by the time I was in the seventh and eighth grade, I was wanting to take my life. And thankfully, I met Jesus in the ninth grade, well, the 10th grade, through the ministry of Young Life. And that began a lifelong healing journey. But that kind of gives you an overall idea. Lots of neglect, drugs in the home, unstable, moving around a lot, death of a parent, three marriages, four marriages actually it ended up becoming, and one little girl, and who is very alone almost all of the time.
So tragic, isn't it, Mary? Seriously, so tragic. And yet, as we said, it's happening far more. And I guess, Mary, we're just hearing more about it because of technology and
Mm.
in all the ways, but nothing can prepare your heart for that as a young child. My heart just breaks and aches every time you share your story because the righteous anger just
Mm.
boils up in me that was not God's plan. Amen.
Yeah, I definitely would not choose that. That's for sure. It was the worst.
It was the worst. Well, let's talk about how did the secrecy and shame surrounding the abuse affect your sense of self and relationships as you grew older?
Yeah, before I retold my parent at once I became a Christian, it was this very silent shame of feeling like, especially when all these perpetrators would come toward me and I would run away. I thought there must be something wrong with me to solicit this. So there was that. And then my sense of self was shattered because in my mind, I thought the only reason I was put on earth was to be neglected or abused. And that was a really hard thing to come to terms with, but that was my experience. I was neglected and abused. And so I didn't know any other way out. I was very scrappy and I was intelligent and I was a good student and I rebelled positively. But it certainly did affect my trust level with relationships, particularly with men. And there's been a lot of healing in those areas as I've gotten older and older.
Well, you talked about, at one time getting so low that you just thought about self-harm. Is that one of the times, is that the beginning when you began to recognize that you needed healing from the trauma?
I don't think I could have said it that way, but I would say that in my eighth grade year, I had a counselor who noticed it. Nobody was paying attention to me, even when I was making cries for help. But he paid attention and he gave me a hall pass that would allow me to get out of class at any time. And this little straight A student, I would just like burst into tears in the middle of a class because in eighth grade, there was a third divorce going on and I was going to lose another dad. And so I was just really a mess, but he did pay attention and I'm really, really grateful that he did.
Well, I have this. Where and how did your faith journey intersect with your healing process? Were there specific moments where God felt especially present in your life?
It's interesting because when I met Jesus, I had that very strong evangelical zeal to save my family, So I went home and I told them and, "Hey, Jesus," and don't you want to go to heaven and all of that. And at that moment, there was a rift that occurred and I started becoming persecuted. I wasn't killed persecuted, like I don't want to bring it up to that level, but constant persecution from my family of origin. And um, weirdly, that actually really helped me because I understood that I wasn't going to find my healing within that structure. I was even really scrappy and I was 15 and a half when I met Jesus. I really wanted to go to church. I had to wait till I was 16 to get a car and, old car, of course, and my license. And I looked up in the phone book in the olden days, churches, and just started finding a church on my own and then just did it. So a lot of the healing came and the turning points came in those relationships with people at church, in those relationships with people in Young Life, the counselors there. Um, that was really where the transformation happened.
Well, I have here, in what ways did therapy, counseling, or support systems play a role in your recovery? And what advice do you have for others seeking help? What would you add to that?
When I was working through the lion's share of my healing, there people were not really trauma informed, and I was poor. So I could not afford counseling. I read a lot of counseling books and I read a lot about sexual abuse, and that did help me quite a bit. My lion's share of healing happened in college where I had people who just loved to pray for me, dignified my story, told me I wasn't crazy, believed me, and then prayed for me. And when I finally did get counseling later in life, the counselor asked, how long have you been, going to therapy? And I said, zero point 0.0 years. And she thought I was joking. I'd had a lot of healing up until that point, and it bewildered me a little bit. And I thought, no, why am I okay? Why does she think I've been through all this counseling? And I think I can only attribute it to the prayers of the saints. Now, all that to say, that's not the only way to heal. That was just, I had no other possible way. That was the way I had to do it. But, since then I have availed myself to counseling and trauma therapy and all of those other really great things that have been helpful to me. But I also have found something interesting. I don't heal the same way everybody else heals. Like EMDR did not work for me. It works for other people beautifully, but we have to let God be unique with us in our healing journey. And don't get discouraged if something like, oh, this is the thing that's going to fix you and it doesn't. Don't get discouraged because there's other ways that God can bring healing to your life. For instance, EMDR is eye tracking, where you track your eyes left and right while you recall a memory that's traumatic, and it rewires and kind of reframes the memory for you. Lovely, great idea. I love that God made this in our brains to help us deal with trauma. It's amazing. But I realized that that is the exact same thing I'm doing when I'm jogging. And I think a lot of my healing came from eye tracking while I was recalling a memory and jogging. Or you can also be a walker if you're a walker. So there's just lots of different ways that God can use to bring healing.
Mary, I want to ask you, is that the same as brain spotting?
It's
Are you?
similar. It's very
Yeah,
similar. Yeah, it's the
there's
same idea.
brain spotting is kind of new and cutting edge in a
Mhm,
way. It's been
mhm.
very effective for a lot of the people I've ministered to, and I think there is a small difference, isn't there?
There is, I've had both, and I can't articulate what the difference is, except that I think the brain spotting doesn't necessarily have the eye tracking or like a little, apparatus in your hand.
Yes.
It's something different. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Now, forgiveness. I mean, this is huge. I mean, how do you navigate, Mary, forgiving your abusers? And what misconceptions do people often have about that?
First of all, I'll say that nobody gets to prescribe your forgiveness journey. That happens a lot with victims. Like I have heard so many stories of, especially in clergy sexual abuse, where the church will say, well, you just need to forgive them, and we're going to actually meet together and you can forgive them in person. And it's just like the most traumatic thing I can think of. Forgiveness is multi-layered. It is very long. And for someone to say, well, you just need to forgive them does not understand trauma. I may have said the words, I forgive them, but there's like 87 layers underneath that. So I may have forgiven him of one thing, and then I'm triggered 5 days later. And what used to happen is I would think, oh, I must not have forgiven them because I'm triggered. No, it just means there's another layer of forgiveness. So it's just this long, long journey to forgive those folks who have harmed you. And, I'm at the point now where, of course, it's been years and years, so I have forgiven, but I also feel sorry for uh, who they might have become. I found one, I didn't find the other. The one died. Um, I think it's what they did to me was terrible, but it must have been terrible for them in terms of how that would make them grow up into a terrible adult. So, there's some empathy there, but I still label what they did as completely terrible.
Well, I love that you say we each individually have a prescription for forgiveness. I think that really makes a lot of sense, Mary. Just because it's a cookie cutter, there's no sense in that, is there? There's no cookie cutter. Oh, this is how you forgive and it's forgotten.
And it's not, as I just mentioned, it's not just one decision. And I used to think it was like, okay, on March 4th, I forgave. And that's where it got really complicated because then, you keep encountering more weird feelings. You're like, oh, I must not have. So just be aware that it's not a one and done. It's a one and a two and a three and a four and a five.
Wow. That is awesome. I have here just how has sharing your testimony publicly through books and speaking, how have they been both challenging and liberating for you?
Challenging in the sense that, especially in the age of the internet, like prior to that, I would share this story publicly, but it would never be recorded or anything like that. So I was not afraid of getting backlash from my family. But in the age of everything being recorded, it's a greater risk. Um, so that's what's scary is just knowing that I've got family members who might think differently. I'm less worried about that now. I was much more worried about what they thought of me earlier. I don't really care anymore, but it's also been liberating, and it's been liberating in the sense that whenever I share my story, someone inevitably comes up and talks to me about their story, and they'll say something to the effect of, "I thought I was the only one." And even though we're in the age of Me Too, it is really helpful for people who have walked the healing journey to go before and say, this isn't going to define your life for the rest of your life. You will get through this.
That is powerful. Just sharing that hope, Mary. I mean,
Mhm.
I know it can become very desperate for those that have been abused. It's terrible. I'm going to pivot here to biblical truths and scriptures. What became the anchors for you in the darkest parts when you were processing the abuse?
I run to Second Corinthians, my favorite book in the Bible, and talks about in the first part of that about there were not many, not noble, not many mighty. God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, the things that are not, that he may nullify the things that are. And that to me was just my testimony of I was nothing. I was nothing. I was disregarded. I was trashed. I was counted as nothing. And God said, I think she's going to understand my strength because she has none left. And so
Mm,
that was super important. And then jumping forward to 2 Corinthians 12:9 and 10, that God says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. And then Paul says, most gladly, therefore, I'm going to boast about my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may be strong in me. And then he talks about boasting in weaknesses and insults and persecutions and difficulties for Christ's sake. And he says, when I am weak, then I am strong. And so I think back that I think this story, in some ways, though I would never choose it again, is a superpower because it caused me to realize my need for someone stronger than myself.
well, for parents who are listening right now and who might have experienced the same or similar trauma, how has your healing influenced your own parenting style? I really think that's a really big question because it does influence your parenting style, doesn't it?
Well, yes, and there's this terrified feeling that comes over you, like, what if this happens to my kids? So there's that it definitely causes you to be very cautious and afraid. But what I will say is, I was talking to a woman after one of my talks, and she said her mom was in her 70s and had just finally disclosed that she had been sexually abused. And the daughter said everything started to make sense to me. And so I asked her a question. I said, would it have been a gift to you if your mom had worked through her issues prior to raising you or as she was raising you, and she just burst into tears? Your healed heart and your healing journey is not selfish. It is the gift you give to the next generation. We can shove it down and pretend it didn't happen, and that's what most of us do, but it will come out in our behavior and our kids will see it. So if you really want to be a generational changer, you have to work through your own trauma in order to be healthy and not have all these weird behaviors come out that you don't want to have come out.
And you can't stop it if you're not healed. I mean,
No, it
it's
just it comes out.
right, right. So that's a very, very big nugget today. For those that have been through trauma, it doesn't even have to be sexual. It can be any kind of abuse or neglect. And if you don't deal with it now, it will overflow to your children. It will. You just can't avoid it, can you, Mary?
Yeah, and it's not like parents want to do that and they aren't willingly wanting to harm their children. It's just that trauma comes out and you cannot tamp it down. It demands to be dealt with. And it will either be dealt with in a healthy manner or it will spew out of you in an unhealthy manner.
Wow. Well, I want to go into some signs that you could look for if they suspect a child is being abused, and how can they respond effectively, Mary?
First, I would say is just knowing your child and their mood swings and who they are and what they love, and knowing them so well that you would notice a change in behavior. The number one sign of a child being harmed is a change in behavior from positive to negative. And I had all of those signs, but my parents did not have eyes to see. Of course, there can be some obvious signs with sexual abuse in terms of blood and things like that. But also a reticence to do something that they normally liked to do. Like if they always liked going to their aunt and uncle's house and then suddenly don't want to go there anymore, that's a time to start asking some very pointed questions about why don't you want to see Uncle Joe? Um, and we can be very careful about sleepovers and things like that. I know a lot of parents just don't do those because they're are afraid, and I affirm that. I think that's very wise to protect your kids from that. But number one, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is behavior change. And so pay very close attention if your child's behavior has changed, and begin to maybe seek some professional advice, and ask a lot of loving, open-ended questions and reassuring them that nothing is off limits in talking. Another thing that will help is if you've had the sex talk earlier than you thought you wanted to, which then gives kids language to talk about body parts in a very neutral, non-stressful way so that they don't feel the shame of coming to you and saying something. But if it's been like really neutralized and say, this is, no one should touch you where your swimsuit touches you, those kinds of things. It's very basic. And just letting them know you're not in trouble. You'll never be in trouble. You can always come to me. I will not judge you, that nothing is wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. Having that kind of place of safety and grace is really important.
Well, I've got a really powerful question to ask you. If you were to look back, Mary, what would you tell your younger self in the midst of the abuse to offer hope?
When most of it was happening, I was in the forest, and I think the Lord knew that I needed the gift of disassociation during that time. And so I would fly up in my mind to the top of those tree branches. And it helped me to kind of disconnect from what was going on. And so in some ways, I would just point out that the Lord, made our bodies in such a way that we could disassociate like that. Um, and of course, I would say, hang on. But on the other hand, that question's hard because I would have had to tell that little girl that it wasn't going to be until she was maybe 15 to 18 where she would finally find some reprieve and find people who would love her. So think about that, like 10 years of not really feeling loved it's just devastating to think about.
It is devastating. Just breaks every portion of my heart. You're talking about the healing coming so, later in it. Do you still maintain ongoing healing today? And what message of encouragement do you have for those still in the trenches?
Yeah, I just want to encourage people. There were years where I thought, when will this ever get better? It was so dark and I was kind of walking down this like very darkened path and I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It does get better. It does get better. And you just have to keep trudging through the mud. Um, and I think the Lord has been kind and given me these little pinpricks of light along the way of like, okay, it is happening. I am healing. But it is a long journey and I'm still working on it. And so just to say that I will be okay in the new heavens and the new earth, the tears will be wiped away. I will not have all of these pains anymore. But until I get there, there will still be this struggle of worth in particular.
Well, Mary, I just can't thank you enough. I cannot express to you my honor of you. Just, I'm in awe of how you've been able to take all of this and then put together so many meaningful books and prayers for so many others. How can people connect with you?
They can find me at marydemuth.com. And then I also have a freebie for your listeners. If they go to we2.org/21 days, I have a 21-day email sequence that's absolutely free. That is all of the best practices of healing and the healing journey from sexual abuse in particular. So that's we2.org/21 days.
Well, Mary, again, you just give and give and give. You've helped so many find healing. Is there anything lasting you would like to leave us with today?
I would say that Jesus is a gentleman healer. If I had looked at this healing journey in my late teens, early 20s and seen what kind of twists and turns it would have made, I would have been like, I'm out. I do not want to do all this work. It's so much to do. But he just gently leads, like with breadcrumbs on the trail, and he is a gentleman. And so I just want to encourage you to trust that he does know what he's doing. It does seem like it's taking a long time, but you have to understand trauma and a soul wound is a very deep wound, and it has to be cleaned out first, and then it has to be stitched up, and there has to be antibiotics. And it's just a long journey to heal from such a big wound like that.
Well, thank you again, Mary. Your testimony leaves us in awe of the God who turns ashes into beauty, proving that no wound is beyond his healing touch. Through your story, we've seen how vulnerability can spark chains of freedom, empowering us to break cycles of pain in our families and beyond. Thank you again, Mary, for your bravery. Listeners, if this resonates, reach out for support. Your healing journey starts with one courageous step toward the light today. I love y'all. I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us on Warfare Parenting. Remember, you can overcome even the most challenging parenting battles with faith and the right strategies. If this episode has touched your heart or provided valuable insights, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Your support helps other struggling parents find the hope and guidance they need. Until next time, remain steadfast in faith and remember, together we never give up on our families. Visit my website too for my new book, Warfare Parenting, a daily battle plan to fight for your child. The first 10 days are free on my website and many other free resources. Go to LaineLawsonCraft.com.